In the anime community, there are several questions that lead into either debates or full-blown arguments. Who is best girl? What's the greatest anime of all time? Does such and such beat Goku? And today's question, what is and isn't anime? Well, I've been running the show for a bit, so I think it's about time I tackle my interpretation of this question. And be warned, my opinions will definitely be different than yours, and could potentially anger a few of you, but please put your pitchforks down and let me explain. Be aware, angering my audience is not my intention. This isn't rage bait, and I understand that it's a highly discussed topic, and if worded poorly, can come across as simply fanning the flames. But these are my genuine beliefs, and I hope I can explain them well enough. The term anime is actually an abbreviation of the Japanese word animation, which is a cognate of the English word animation. Though the roots of animation exist in things like stroboscopic illusions, the important thing to know is animation truly began around the early 1900s. Japanese animation began at about the same time, though anime as we tend to know it today is often believed to originate with the show Astro Boy, which came out in 1963. It features many of the same styles and techniques we've seen in anime for decades, like lip flaps, oval eyes, repeated or limited animation, defined lines, and exaggerated expressions, among many others. The anime style exploded in popularity in the late 80s and early 90s, spreading across the world during the technological boom of the internet. And ever since, there's been a debate of what does and doesn't count as anime, since the style has influenced so many creators across the world. The prevailing idea among many is that anime is simply Japanese animation. If it's made in Japan, it's anime. If it's not, then it's not anime. Apologies for being a contrarian, but I don't really agree with that notion. My main reason for thinking so is because anime itself is basically an artistic movement, kind of like the European Renaissance, a name that should sound very familiar to anyone who didn't fall asleep in history class. Think stuff like Cubism, Dada, Neoclassicism, pop art, all styles of art that quickly rose to popularity due to their unique cliches and techniques. Much like modern anime. They went through various waves through time as new creators came in with their own ideas and twists on the style. But nobody is saying that these art forms were specifically tied to one location. Let's take a look at Cubism, an early 20th century art movement that started in Paris. Many of you may recognize Cubism's most famous artist, Pablo Picasso. We all had to stare at Guernica for so long that it's permanently burned into our brains. Or maybe that's just me. Either way, the style looked at life at its simplest forms, breaking up objects into the barest shapes from a flat perspective. It went through various different versions, like early Cubism, Proto-Cubism, Crystal Cubism, but the style wasn't tied specifically to Paris, where it originated. It even made its way over to Japan and China in the 1910s and 1920s. Animation in Japan started in the early 1900s, where the industry actually struggled against many of its competitors, such as Disney, which led to various cost-cutting decisions, like using cutouts rather than traditional cell animation. And even when it transitioned into the more modern era, like with Astro Boy, many of these cost-cutting decisions ultimately became integral to the medium. The use of suspended time, lip flaps, and other measures to limit animation cost turned into anime cliches that practically define the medium. And truthfully, any other aspects that define anime exist in genres rather than anime itself. So these techniques can and have easily been replicated elsewhere. I think most of us growing up in the 90s and 2000s tried drawing anime and manga characters at one point, and much like past artistic movements, it continued to grow with time. While older cell animation was more vibrant, with deeper colors and fuller hair, when animation switched to digital in the 2000s, things grew flatter but also faster to make. The faces became more rounded and exaggerated, with expressions far zanier. If we limited art form to one location, while refusing to accept innovations or other interpretations, then we risk limiting that style until it becomes repetitive and derivative. It becomes less about what new can be done with the style and more about simply sticking to the formula. Now, there are two counter-arguments to this way of thinking. The first is that anime itself is more of a cultural style. A lot of animes celebrate or satire Japanese way of life, expressing the ideas and wonders of the country in art or poking fun at its flaws. So many anime are rooted firmly in Japan due to the setting, cultural influences, or origins of the ideas or narrative. Plucking anime away from this culture can feel disrespectful and can even potentially be a form of cultural appropriation if egregious enough. I've heard this argument against dubbing, particularly when it comes to adding modern or Western slang into the scripts, when they originally weren't there. Though, admittedly, that is an entirely different discussion, maybe for a different video. The second argument is that Japanese creators don't really care about what those of us in the West say, and will continue to make the art that they want to make whether we consider it anime or not. Which is fair, we are kind of a secondary audience, and it's very important for an artist to follow through with their vision, rather than being influenced by their audience solely in an artistic viewpoint. Both of these ways of thinking are valid, and it's honestly why this entire topic is so difficult in the first place, because there are genuine arguments for both sides. But I personally disagree, at least when it comes to the distinction of what is and isn't anime. One of the greatest things about creating art is that artists will always influence other artists. I myself have been inspired by Percy Jackson, the Inheritance series, and Dungeons & Dragons when it comes to the creation of my new book series. And many of our most celebrated and well-known movements of art grew because new renditions came to light. Different cultures will look at the same style and analyze it in different ways, allowing similar ideas to feel fresh and new. This was the biggest draw of anime. Many of us grew tired of the monotony of Western media and flocked to anime at the turn of the century, with its unique ideas, colorful style, and new set of tropes and cliches that we were completely unfamiliar with. We got stories of war, but people piloted giant mechas. Everyday slice of life, but it was set in Japan with a different set of rules. Transforming heroes instead of superheroes. Quirky comedies with new kind of jokes due to different cultures. It inspired many of us to create something entirely new from what we've known until then. So it's only fair to allow these creators to flourish with their vision of anime. Western series like Castlevania, Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Boondocks, and RWBY adapted much of the styles and cliches of anime into new settings with Western influence. And they're great! Well, mostly. Castlevania is kind of an ironic take, because it was originally a Japanese game set in the West, to later be adapted into a show by the West. Much like comparing 80s anime to 2010s anime offers a perspective on the shift in the art style, the same can be said of Western anime to Japanese anime. Many modern Netflix animated shows use styles closer to 80s and 90s anime, with fluid animation techniques to make seamless action like we see in shows like Demon Slayer or Kill la Kill, but also adapt Western styles of lip movements instead of lip flaps. Avatar is greatly inspired by the art style of 2000s anime, adopting its exaggerated comedic expressions, but creating something that feels multicultural due to the nature of the various nations. The Boondocks is also inspired by 2000s anime styles, but is, well, if you know, you know. I'd rather not get this video age restricted. When we allow cultures to influence each other, we get great art. Anime like My Hero Academia, Black Lagoon, and Witchblade used ideas primarily found in the States. Witchblade was even originally a Western comic before it became an anime, and used them to create new, memorable shows. Frieren Beyond Journey's End uses a mishmash of fantasy ideas, many of them being popularized by Tolkien like elves and dwarfs, to feel more like a D&D campaign instead of a traditional Japanese fantasy, even having one of its monsters, the Red Dragon, look far more like a Western version than an Eastern version. Solo Leveling is one of the biggest anime of the last few years, and guess what? Its source material is Korean. There was even an uproar when Song Jin-woo was originally going to be changed to Japanese for the anime, as many saw it as distasteful. I know this might sound like it has nothing to do with the argument, but I think it does. Anime as a style has had influence overseas, and has in turn been influenced by overseas media. Even if we want to go back to the argument that anime is primarily made in Japan and these other examples I've given are simply anime inspired, where do we draw the line? Are we also including children's programming in the list of anime? Because I usually see people call them cartoons, despite the fact that many anime fans get very mad or heated if you call their show cartoons. Are we also going to talk about shows that are outsourced? Several episodes of popular series like Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood were outsourced to companies outside of Japan. Or how about shows with foreign staff? Is Afro Samurai an anime when Samuel L. Jackson had a big hand in its production? While Cyberpunk Edge Runners was made by the Japanese studio Trigger, CD Projekt Red also had a lot of say on the series and were overall supervising its creation. Hell, they're the reason the show exists. And there's also plenty of examples where Japanese staff will actually work on shows overseas. So do these count or not? When we limit the style to mean one specific thing, it becomes messy. The mold is far too restrictive, so anything that pushes the mold a bit is hard to classify. Then it gets pushed more, and soon we don't know what's what. When we focus so much time and energy on what we consider to fit this messy description, we lose sight of things that fall outside of it. We restrict not only ourselves and way of thinking, but to an extent, the creators. Though Japanese artists often consider home audiences more than overseas, we are still considered. Our input does have influence. And we also negatively affect new creators, people outside of Japan who wish to make their own anime. This discourse can be discouraging for them, and we can run the risk of never getting to see their art or negatively affecting their art as it's being created. Just as My Hero Academia is a superhero show that was created outside the United States, where superheroes originated, so too can an anime exist outside of Japan. We've seen beautiful series heavily inspired by anime that have also influenced a new wave of creators. It's this incredible back and forth that benefits art, rather than takes away from it. Art should never be limited. Like a garden, we let it flourish and grow, becoming something worth marveling over. Now, don't think I'm saying anime should be an extremely loose term. I still think that the label and some level of critical distinction between anime and non-anime is very important. With that in mind, what exactly is anime then? Like I said in the beginning, it's often attributed to a few cliches, like more limited animation such as lip flaps and panning, round and larger eyes, and more exaggerated character designs like spiky or dramatic hair and large breasts. But these aren't things you find in every anime. Some series have almost consistently incredible animation, like Frieren or Mob Psycho 100. Others are more lifelike, such as Cowboy Bebop, and some are even less, looking more like Western cartoons, like Panty and Stocking. Well, like any artistic movement, it's a flexible and diverse form of animation, though the general rules and priorities of anime differ from Western animation, such as more emphasis on beautiful art direction, expressive faces, and often limited but also stylistic animation. Rather than a blatant line of what is and isn't anime, it's more like a blurred line. Honestly, it could be up to the audience's perspective if a show is anime or not. I personally believe shows like Castlevania and Avatar: The Last Airbender count as anime, but shows like The Legend of Vox Machina don't, or are just lightly inspired by anime. Anime has and will continue to change and evolve. Anime now looks very different than it did 30 years ago, and 30 years from now, it'll probably still look different. And that's incredible. I'm personally very excited to see how much this style evolves and spreads throughout the years. If you guys enjoyed this video, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. And if you want to be notified for future content, also go ahead and click that bell as well. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.